Bom dia, Giordano here from the Juice Media. Welcome back to the Juice Media podcast, a companion to the Honest Government ad series. This episode of the podcast is recorded on Wurundjeri land, and it is the companion to our latest Honest Government ad about Brazil.
Hello, I'm from the Brazilian government, with a message to the world as we prepare to have a coup, election, to decide if this little shit goblin should run the country for another 4 years.
As you know, since our own election earlier this year, we've been on a mini world tour of shitfuckery. We visited the US, then the UK, and now we visit Brazil. Why Brazil? Because Brazil is about to have an election, and it is one of this decade's most important elections, given that the outcome will affect not just Brazilians, but the world at large. That's because, as this New Scientist article reiterated just today, the outcome will effectively determine the fate of the Amazon, which plays a crucial role in maintaining the global carbon cycle and which scientists say stands on the brink of a tipping point. So I figured we should make an Honest Government ad to lend Brazil a hand from afar. That and the fact that we've had so many Brazilians imploring us to make an HGA for them that I figured this would be the only way to make them stop. Jokes aside, thank you to all the Brazilians who've commented on the video thanking us for making this HGA. It means a lot to know that Brazilians in our audience can feel the love from the other side of the world ahead of this crucial election. And I love the sense of international solidarity we're cultivating here together, a sort of shared consciousness of shitfuckery. I'm also stoked to see so many Brazilians commenting that we did a good job of nailing the Bolsonaro government. And I want to make it clear that this is in great part because I teamed up with a local expert on Brazilian shitfuckery to write it, Sabrina Fernandes. A PhD in sociology with a specialization in political economy, Sabrina is an eco-socialist activist in Brazil. She's also the creator of the super popular YouTube channel Tese Once and lead editor for Jacobin Brazil. As well as providing essential local knowledge of Brazilian politics, popular references and memes, Sabrina also performed the voiceover for this HGA, our first ever guest voiceover. And so, for all those reasons, I'm stoked to have Sabrina as my guest on the podcast today to talk about the process of making this HGA together and, of course, the coming Brazilian election. I hope you enjoy our chat, and I'll catch you on the other side. Welcome to the Juice Media podcast, Sabrina Fernandes. It's great to have you here, and thank you so much for contributing your knowledge and your voice to our latest Honest Government ad about Brazil.
Hi, Giordano. I'm really happy to be here and so happy with the collaboration. And also because I've been a huge fan of the Juice Media for a really long time. And we know that the timing for this was just perfect too. So I'm really happy with it.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. Likewise, and I want to ask you about the election, which is in a few days. There's a major election in Brazil. I want to ask you about that. But first, I know many people in our audience are going to be curious to know about the collaboration behind this Honest Government ad and how it unfolded. We started talking about doing this about 2 years ago. Then we had put everything on hold because of COVID and then our election here in Australia earlier this year. But I'm so glad we made it happen, as you said. What was your experience of working on the Honest Government ad and specifically doing the voiceover for it?
Well, the first thing that people should know is that my deal with Giordano was that I should get to say shit fuckery. So that was part of the first, it was part of the contract. And I really thought that it would be interesting to do something that we could sum up some of the worst things that were done by the Bolsonaro government, but in a way that also related to Brazilian humor. So I think what makes me quite happy with the outcome is that we still captured the essence of the classic HGAs, but we also brought in these little things about Brazilian meme culture, and the audience has been really positive in their feedback about it, mentioning certain things like agro boys or certain things around, the way that we approach the Bolsonaro family. I think that was a nice touch, and I was really happy that you let me just say little things here and there. Oh, we should do this, we should do that. I felt really free in the process of collaborating here.
No, that's so good. I mean, just so everyone knows, I took all of Sabrina's advice because I've been following Brazilian politics a little bit, but I felt really in the dark. And so Sabrina was like, this is, really guided me and said, no, you shouldn't say things like that. I think this is how it would be better received, And especially with all the memes, the agro business ads and all of that. That's all Sabrina's. A lot of people have commented and saying, "Oh, you've captured so many memes," and I was like, "Yeah, that's because I collaborated with a local." So that makes a huge difference, and I love doing that kind of collaboration. So thank you so much for doing that. And just one more thing: how has the Honest Government ad been received in Brazil?
Oh, that's the really cool part. So there's a little bit of it's like for people like from the Juice Media audience who are not aware of like who I am and my work. I have like my own social media following in Brazil. Like I have a political education project and present all over social media and hundreds of thousands of subscribers. So I know that part of my base already knew the Juice Media. They were fans of HGA. They actually were probably pitching you like way back then that, okay, maybe you should do this collab. So those people are really happy about it. And I think that was quite important because they are familiar with the product. So that was good. But the video went viral, and it went viral in ways that we can't even properly account for anymore, because it's not just, YouTube views or the views on Twitter. Twitter is insane right now. It's reaching 700,000 views on the Portuguese hard-coded subtitles. I think it has gone over 500,000 views on Instagram as well. But the things that people started downloading it. And in this particular situation that we're trying to get people excited about defeating this, horrible little shit goblin in the elections on Sunday, people downloaded it and they're sending it on WhatsApp and WhatsApp groups. And we've had people, actually find out about the video in WhatsApp groups first, and then they went and they looked for it online and made comments about it. And in Brazil, this means a lot because WhatsApp is one of the main social media tools utilized by Bolsonaro and his fascist supporters to spread fake news. So the fact that we actually burst the bubble right there, this means a lot.
Okay, that's fantastic. And there's no analytics on that, so we have no idea, but that's a good sign, is what you're saying, is that it's made it into that channel of communication. So that's awesome. That's great. Sabrina, so there's a major election coming up. It's just a few days away now. It's on October 2nd for those that don't know. You're right there in the thick of it. Can you help us, those of us who are outside of Brazil, to get a sense of what is the mood like there right now? What's happening on the ground?
We have a mix of things, and if I could sum it up as two things, there's a mix of fear and hope, which is connected to the level of political violence in Brazil. We've always had a more politically violent country, not the same level as Colombia, but definitely way higher than it should be. And in the past years, with the rise of Bolsonaro and his supporters, threats against the left have grown a lot. We immediately, in 2018, we had Bolsonaro supporters murder Workers' Party supporters. We've had murders this year already. We've had lots of threats, people getting beaten up. So this is something that's really heightening the situation, and it's creating we've had polling around with people saying that, I'm afraid of speaking my vote, because if I speak my vote, I think I could be threatened or I could suffer direct physical violence. So this is a problem. But at the same time, there is a slight chance that Lula might win in the first round. And because there's a wide left coalition behind Lula right now, and it's not just a left coalition, it's a coalition that goes from, a little bit of the radical left until the center right behind Lula, that he might win in the first round. This means obviously some concessions, that there's not going to be a super radical government, probably quite a moderate one, but it's going to be an anti-Bolsonaro government. It's going to be a government that brings back social policies that Bolsonaro destroyed in the past years. And I think primarily it's going to be a government that approaches issues in Brazil around hunger and around death with the seriousness that's required. So that gives people hope as well. And if Lula wins in the first round, that might give us a little bit of a stability.
Okay. Are there any concerns that if Bolsonaro doesn't win, he is going to contest the results, or is that?
Oh, no, that's a real concern. That's the reason we put that in the HGA, right? It's not just because, well, we think this guy is anti-democratic. No, he's mentioned it quite a few times. He usually does that kind of like dog whistling technique of he goes live on like usually on Thursdays, and then he says things and he tells his supporters, well, you know what to do. And little things like that, and that goes around. Yeah. That goes around in forums, and we're quite worried. We had like an increase in the number of Nazi cells in Brazil in the past years, like under Bolsonaro. So this is something pretty gruesome, I guess. And we also know like that Bolsonaro has been attacking the electronic voting system in Brazil for quite a number of years, and he's trying to take away its legitimacy, even though it's the same system that got him elected 4 years ago.
Sure.
He's been saying things about the possibility of fraud, and one of the craziest things out of it all is that he says that if he doesn't win with a 60% advantage on Sunday, then it was definitely fraudulent, and the Supreme Court and like the electoral office is probably in this process. So he's also questioning other types of legitimacy, like from the institutions and things like that.
Right. Okay. We obviously, this all sounds very familiar to those who have followed US politics. It all went down perfectly in the US. So good luck to Bolsonaro in pulling that off. But obviously, the whole world is watching very carefully, because Bolsonaro is regarded as one of the sort of this informal coalition of proto-fascist forces. So all eyes will be on Brazil. And there's a lot at stake in this election for Brazilians domestically, but also the world at large. Can you explain a little bit, just to unpack that? Why is this election so critical, domestically and globally?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think like in the HGA, we talked about the Amazon as part of this, but I think it's larger than that. So when we think in ecological terms, I think Brazil is pretty crucial here. We have like very important biomes. It's not just the Amazon. We also are contributing a lot to climate change because of deforestation. So what we call change in land use. And this is quite a problem, but also if we look into it regionally, it's not just the anti-ecological policies coming from the Bolsonaro government, but also how this Bolsonarista, this far-right camp that has grown stronger around this one public figure, is also connected to the far-right in other places. So we know, for example, the connection between the guy who attempted to murder Cristina in Argentina now. Well, Brazilian and connections to the Brazilian far-right. We know that when we had the coup in Bolivia, the Brazilian far-right was also connected to it. And there are conferences, they go to Europe and like they talk about other places like Hungary. So it's important to have a defeat of someone who was able, unfortunately, to run a country as big as Brazil with an economy as big as Brazil's for 4 years. So this is going to send a sign that you can't just keep doing that. Like, unfortunately, in terms of mobilization in Brazil, we weren't able to send that sign to tell the world that Brazilians are not going to stick with this guy and let this guy run the country for the full mandate. We failed in this process, but hopefully we can send a message now with the elections, and this might help to restructure some of these political relationships.
Absolutely. The mushrooms are sprouting up everywhere. We've just seen the results of the election in Italy, which have delivered another problematic government. I'm actually feeling I've copped a lot of questions because I'm Italian, and a lot of Italians have written to me, "Ma Giordano, why aren't you so, what, you're talking about Brazil, what about Italy?" I was like, fuck man, there's just too much shitfuckery. And we'll have to talk about that as well. But I did want to focus on Brazil for the exact reasons that you've explained. It's such a crucial election. But we will get to Italy as well, my fellow countrymen and women. Don't worry, we will get there. Sabrina, as is often the case, whether it be at Standing Rock fighting against oil pipelines, or here on the Murujuga Peninsula in Australia fighting against Woodside's massive LNG gas export terminal, Indigenous people are often almost always on the front lines of fighting environmental shitfuckery. And in Brazil, they are leading the fight for the Amazon. How have indigenous peoples been impacted by the Bolsonaro government, and what are they calling for?
Yeah, so, well, indigenous genocide is the rule in every colonial situation, but under the Bolsonaro government, there's been like direct attacks. So he dismantled agencies that are responsible for indigenous policies. He's talked about indigenous assimilation, so more of an ethnocide approach to it, as well as arming, like big landowners and land grabbers. So like access to guns has been facilitated by the Bolsonaro government. So this increased violence. We also have more of a presence of organized crime around indigenous territory. So like we've had like more murders, more threats of physical violence against indigenous children as well. In the case of illegal mining, we've had situations of the illegal mining operations in the rivers, actually like the machines actually sucking indigenous children into the machines, and like they died in those circumstances, like the Yanomami children. We actually just had this collaboration, like me with the Progressive International and the Climate Litigation Accelerator and Forensic Architecture. And we used that clip in the HGA showing like new data in terms of like the amount of deforestation and in the and violence against indigenous Yanomami people in the past years with the Bolsonaro government. And we're talking here about like 1,400 football fields in terms of deforestation. And we were talking about mercury poisoning. So we have data to show that this is happening. Latin America is already a very violent region against environmentalists. And this is the reason why like we're pushing, like I hope that like if Lula gets elected, he can like ratify the Escazú agreement that's important in the region to protect environmental defenders. But we also know that none of this is going to be possible if we don't treat indigenous land rights seriously. And like it's been too slow. Like the past, like with the moderate left in power in Brazil, they did way better than Bolsonaro, of course, but it was too slow. So we really have to advance indigenous land settlement in the next 4 years.
Just for people who don't know, by that do you mean actually defining, protecting indigenous territories and ensuring that if any land grabbers go in there and try to take hold of that land, they're actually punished and fines? Is that the kind of sort of approach to
that they get actually recognized as indigenous territory? Because this is one of the issues in Brazil. Like we had like these, I'm not going to go into crazy historical specifics, but since the like 1850, like the land approach in Brazil actually means that you have to kind of prove that's your land. And right now we have these judicial theses running in the Brazilian court that's being currently evaluated by the Supreme Court, that actually says that if an indigenous community hasn't been able to prove that they were in that territory in 1988, which was when the current constitution was basically inaugurated, well, then it's not really their territory. So we're talking here about, settler colonialism that has gone on for a while. So like they kick out the indigenous communities from their territory. And then, well, see, they weren't there, so they can't say it was theirs. So they're basically like legalizing expulsion. And that's why not only we need to fight against this possibility of this judicial thesis being actually approved by the Supreme Court, we actually have to move forward as it is law with indigenous land settlement and agrarian reform. Those two things should go along. They should go together.
There's very strong echoes of what you just described in Brazil and here in Australia, where Aboriginal people since the 1990s under the Native Title Act have the onus has been on them to prove their connection to country, an uninterrupted connection. So that if that connection to country was interrupted by colonization, then as one of the justices ruled in a famous ruling here about 20 years ago, title to that land is washed away by the tide of history, which is basically saying the more colonized you've been, the less recourse you have to justice. And one of our great Aboriginal leaders and activists here, Robbie Thorpe, said this is a perversion of the course of justice. It shouldn't be us proving our connection to this land. It should be you motherfuckers proving your connection to this land here. And it's one of the examples in which settler colonialism uses a law in order to advance its own interests, as always. I want to ask you, Sabrina, if Lula wins, let's assume Lula wins this election as the polls say, and let's assume Bolsonaro doesn't successfully stage a coup, he faces major challenges. It's not going to be an easy ride for him. And specifically in regards to the Amazon, which, yes, is a critical haven of biodiversity and a planetary carbon cycle regulator, but also regarded by many Brazilians as a key source of development and economic growth. Are these two things compatible? And under a Lula government, is there a way for Brazil's development of the Amazon and its inhabitants, human and non-human, to coexist? How do you see that unfolding?
Yeah, so let's talk about the big contradiction standing in the middle of the room. Right. So we know that if Lula gets elected, his government is going to be more environmentally friendly than his previous governments, because I'm not sure if he even actually learned the lesson, but he learned the political lesson that, like, you can't go around just building mega projects everywhere and just, saying this is in the name of development and people should just suck it up. So that there are enough of pressure coming from social movements that might help change the course. And Lula has committed to regenerating the Amazon. So not only stopping deforestation, but also working on other projects for regeneration, projects around agroecology as well. And he's committed to setting Brazil back on the path of fighting climate change. At the same time, there is, a huge aspect of green capitalism popping up here and there in his speeches, and slightly in between the lines of the actual government program that he released, because the language is a little vague, but you can tell it's there because he's been often claiming that Brazil can develop through the Amazon. And when he says that, well, we can exploit the wealth of the biodiversity in the Amazon. There are two ways that this can go about. It can go about through solidaristic bioeconomies. So by empowering the communities, indigenous communities, traditional communities, so Black traditional communities, quilombolas, ribeirinhos, people who work in low-level, low-intensity extractivism. So, for example, the rubber in the Amazon, that's an important community as well. So helping them get their product out there and doing this in a very ecological way, or it can be around commodities. And there is some risk that they're talking about the bioeconomy in the sense of commodities and new exports. And one of the interviews that Lula gave just last week kind of gave that impression as well. I'm investigating some of this because it's part of my research as well. And this worries me because there's still this idea of just saying that we can do sustainable development when we know that sustainable development is a framework imported from the global north into the global south. That's usually based on ecological imperialism, is usually based on taking from one place to keep up the modal living somewhere else. And it's not really about understanding that we need to coordinate things better and we need to plan things better, and knowing that rights of nature should probably be respected, that some ecosystems should remain as untouched as possible, and not everything is about a new source of profit or a new source of economic growth. And yeah, it's going to be complicated in the sense, because my big fear, I published a few articles on this, is that my big fear is that because Bolsonaro was so bad in anti-ecological terms, and by being anti-ecological, I don't mean just, standard climate denialism, but actually dismantling things to rebuild in the green capitalist way. Mm-hmm. But Bolsonaro was so bad in this area that anything that Lula does that's better, that's a little bit more scientific, that it looks a little bit more sustainable, people are just going to say, well, this is wonderful. And
give him the Nobel Prize, yeah.
Yes,
so Bolsonaro has set the bar so low that Lula doesn't have to be as ambitious as he really needs to be, according to the science, according to so on. So if I hear you clearly, yes, you're supporting a Lula win, but it's not like you're like, oh, great, now we can rest. This is, you'll have a lot of work to do then to hold him to account to.
Yes, we need to keep grassroots organizing going. We need to mobilize better, because one of the reasons why we weren't able to get Bolsonaro out is that demobilization is currently the rule in Brazil. And there's a tendency right now of just saying that, well, Lula is going to fix everything. Like one of the mottos of the campaign is like for Brazil to be happy again. And I've been I hate to be the messenger in these situations, but I think it's kind of my job just saying that, no, we're not going to wake up in January, 1st of January, when like Lula has his inauguration and then Brazil is going to be happy again. Sure. We're going to have to build this. And sometimes we might have to fight Lula on this, but we need to do this, in the proper way, based on social and class struggles, and all the way that the far right has played dirty against Lula, like imprisoning him, like persecuting him. No, we need to do like proper leftist opposition that's based on social justice principles, and hope that the president actually fights along with us in this process if he needs to convince, the other players in the government that, well, that the people are right. So you guys just get out of the way.
Again, very similar to the situation that we're in. Our election delivered a win for our Labour Party, and because we've had a decade of absolute shitfuckery under the previous Conservative government, the bar has been set very low, and everything that this new government does is like rays of sunshine and butterflies and rainbows. But our job, as your job will be in the event of, we hope, Bolsonaro's defeat, is to keep putting the pressure on and keep ensuring that we keep pushing. So thank you so much, Sabrina, for giving us a bit of an insight on that. I just wanted to ask you one last, more of a personal question than anything. I wanted to ask you, what made you take this path of combining academia and being a YouTuber? You have a PhD in sociology, and you've created a very successful YouTube presence with your channel Tese Once, and also on Twitch and Instagram and Twitter. As someone who's taken a fairly similar path myself, I'm also interested in this on a personal level. Can you give us a bit of a sense of why you took this path?
There are two answers to this. One is beautiful and the other is pragmatic. I'll do the pragmatic answer first. I was unemployed. I had finished my PhD, and I was waiting for like opportunities. I had, back in Brazil, the university system was already quite dismantled back then, so not a lot of jobs coming along. And I just decided that I missed the classroom, and let's do this. And it was a good opportunity for me to throw around ideas from my research and see how people connected to it. That worked out, and then I got a job, and then I started working these insane, super long weeks trying to reconcile everything. But the actual the answer that keeps me along nowadays, because now I actually don't need to do this for income or anything, is that I believe that political education is a key tool for us to work not just in mobilizing movements, but actually getting us to think of more strategic questions that are not just these immediate questions that, for example, we're fighting to get rid of a far-right government. We actually need to set the questions of how to ensure that they never come back in, and what kind of society that we want. And what we're doing is not just about the next year or the next 5 years, it's also about the end of the century. So these big questions, they don't usually turn up in the newspapers. They don't usually turn up during the elections. And political education is quite key for us to keep track of them, to try to sow the seeds of, political critical thinking in society. And then from that, people can get organized within political organizations of all sorts, social movements, political parties, and then we'll get more concrete tools to work together to make the changes that we need. So this is what keeps me going, as exhausted as I am every day.
And I have to say, you work incredibly hard. We've been communicating for the past month, basically, and you're moving around doing so many different things. So, kudos to you for balancing those two things. For those who don't know, we'll put the links in the video description to Sabrina's channel, Tese 11, which means Thesis 11, which is a very apt reference to one of Marx's theses, which the quote is, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it," which I think it's summed up very well in everything that you've just described. And on that note, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Sabrina, and also for all the knowledge that you shared and the time, and for lending your voice to this Honest Government ad. It was an honor to collaborate with you. And just before we go, I just wanted to bring out Ellen, who's here, who obviously brought it all together. And I just wanted to say what an amazing job she did.
Thanks. No, Ellen was fantastic. Fantastic. I was so happy about it. And it was so good that people who are not familiar with it, they kept like, but is it her voice? Is it not her voice? And then we had all of those comments on how authentic the Brazilian accent was or not. And I had a lot of fun with those. So apparently I'm not doing such a great job with my own Brazilian accent.
Yeah, you need to work on it, Sabrina.
Yes. But no, it was so good. I was really happy to take part in this. And let's just hope that we don't have to do another HGA in Brazil. Well, we want to be done with the shit fuckery.
It would be lovely to collaborate again, but let's hope that it's not needed.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. Good luck with the election. We'll be watching very closely, and all the best to you and everyone in Brazil.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Juice Media podcast. Before I sign off, I want to acknowledge all the comments from people imploring us to make an HGA for their government too. Pakistan, India, Canada, Italy, Sri Lanka, South Africa, Philippines, Iran, Greece, Portugal. We see you. I feel honored by all these requests, but it also saddens me because I know many of them come from places where the situation is very, very shit. So I promise we'll do our very best to try and make HGAs for all these countries when we can. I see this as an important part of our work because whilst different countries have different shitfuckery, different histories, and uniquely shit policies, the shitfuckery, history, and policies are also interconnected. So we can learn a lot about our own shitfuckery when we learn about Brazil's, or Canada's, or India's, because in a way, we are all united by the shitfuckery. And on that heartwarming note, thank you to all the Aussie patrons who have supported us while we focus on other countries' shitfuckery. You'll be glad to know that we'll be returning to our own shores in our next HGA. Well, that's all for now. Make sure to follow Sabrina's important work on YouTube and other platforms. All the links are in the show notes and the video description. Thanks to Ellen for helping to edit and produce the podcast. And as always, thanks to our patrons for making our work possible, especially our patron producers who support us via our highest tier of $100 a month. You've been listening to the Juice Media podcast with me, Giordano. I'll catch you very soon for our next Honest Government ad. Till then, take care.